Hi, this is Mary Baca with Remotely Unique, and I am going to talk today about stigmas, the truth about judging others. And when you look at stigma, what we're really talking about is shame, and I'll tell you why. Over the years, when I've talked to people in my counseling practice and my holistic practice, and just even people I meet personally, I think every one of us have experienced being stigmatized in some area of our life or at some point in our life, even if it's brief. Some people, unfortunately, experience being stigmatized for lengthy periods of time, such as the case with race. Race is oftentimes a reason for other people who are racist, for example, to stigmatize a person of a certain color. And that is also what leads to things like racial profiling. That's an extended experience with being stigmatized. Although we all can experience being stigmatized even in the moment. And what we're talking about is judgment, right? When one person stigmatizes someone else, they're really making a judgment about that person, whether that they're judging them based on their color, whether they're judging them based on their sexual orientation, such as is the case oftentimes with LGBTQIA+. Whatever it is, there are judgments being made by the person that's stigmatizing the other one. Also, the same is with mental health. And even people stigmatize themselves. Over the years, I've had people come in that refer to themselves as crazy or hopeless or a mess or unsalvageable, damaged goods. These are the things, the descriptors that I hear a lot of people describe themselves as. So stigmatization doesn't always just come from another person. It can also be inflicted by self. One of the areas of concern where people often can die literally from being stigmatized is with suicide. So say, for example, you have a kid who gets bullied at school for being quote-unquote different. That kid is being stigmatized, and sometimes it just gets to be too much and leads up to the point where somebody just says, I can't deal with this anymore, and they take their own life. And so looking at this issue is really, really important because it can be fatal. One of the things, too, with shame or stigmatizing is it prevents a person from speaking their truth, because if a person thinks they're going to be judged, oftentimes they won't speak their truth. They won't say how they really feel or how they think, because they're afraid that if they do, they're going to lose that job or they're going to lose their partner or friends or different things, that there's going to be some kind of repercussion if they really stand true to themselves and say the truth of how they feel. And so that ends up being a really difficult situation. And over time, it cascades, right? Because it builds up and accumulates. And so often there's a cascade of the repercussion and the impact of that. And it's never pretty. So with mental health, people even get stigmatized for seeking help or needing help. And so consequently, a lot of times people don't go seek help because they're afraid of the labels that are going to be forced upon them and the judgment if even their family knows that they sought help. There's a lot of price to pay socially, personally, occupationally sometimes. When it comes to first responders, there's a lot of stigma still, unfortunately, about first responders who seek help, that they're weak, they can't handle the job. Even the public, oftentimes I have been told, by the public that, well, they knew what they were getting into, they knew what they signed up for, so why are they complaining, basically? And so that's how stigma is born, right? It starts with judgment. Robert Arrieta, he's a friend of mine and a friend of a lot of people. He's a Albuquerque fire paramedic and firefighter. And he owns a nonprofit called Skulls for Hope. And he just put a Facebook post last night about stigma and talks a lot about that, about breaking the stigma and having the conversation like the one that I'm trying to start now today, is realizing that there doesn't have to be a stigma attached to needing help and getting help. And if we could break that down, we would be removing so many barriers, and which would just be able to really help a lot of people. When people inflict stigma upon themselves, it's often because they don't feel good enough. They feel like something's wrong with them, even if nothing is. And I'm telling you, a person can look perfect. They can look like they stepped out of a GQ magazine. I've seen it so many times. And just have the self-esteem of nothing, like just feel like they are nothing and feel like so much shame about themselves and force stigma on themselves, just with what they really and truly think about themselves. And never assume that you know how somebody in your life feels about themselves. Always ask, because you don't know how somebody feels about themselves unless you ask. That is the only way. And actually, you don't even know then, right? Because if they feel like you're going to judge them, they're probably not going to tell you the truth. So if you aren't going to judge them, you may have to ask a few times and in a few different ways what they really feel about themselves. That is a question that doesn't hardly ever flow through somebody's lips in terms of asking their loved ones how they really feel about themselves. One of the other populations that really stigmatize themselves are drug users or drug abusers. I would also put into that category people who are abusive in other ways, physical violence, physical abusers. Most often they really get into a cycle where at some point they just are full of self-loathing because of, that cycle of, drinking or using drugs to escape from reality, to escape from how they feel. And so then there goes the usage. But at some point after that, they are met with the reality of what that does to the people around them. Or maybe they used drugs the night before and so they didn't make it into work. And there's just so much shame that comes with that, and so much self-loathing and beating up oneself that comes with that whole package. And that is a very real thing. So the next time you're judging, another good example is a homeless person. Homeless people are judged all the time. And we need to remember that homeless people, most of them, I don't have the percentage in front of me, but most of them have mental illness. And that's why they're homeless. I, know of people that had high top executive jobs and, lost everything that they had, maybe because they were in a bad accident, and things again just cascaded downward from that point, who are homeless. But when we look at homeless people, pay attention the next time you see somebody to the judgment that you make about that person. And a lot of times even people won't give a handout to a homeless person because of the judgment and stigmatization that goes behind their thoughts about that person. I mean, that person is a human being. And sometimes we forget that. We forget that there are human beings attached to the end result of our stigmatizing people. Unfortunately, that is a truth. So we definitely need to have more conversations like this and raise awareness about and have other people share their story about times they felt judged or stigmatized in their own life and the repercussion. Yes, it's true. Some people will walk away from that and use that for a positive. They'll use that to go and say, well, I'm not that. I'm not those things that my peers told me I was, that I was worthless, or that my mom or dad said that I was. I am going to move beyond that, and I'm going to prove to myself and everyone else that I can rise above that, and I really am worthy, and I really am something special. But man, that doesn't happen usually. And a lot of times it's a long, hard road before somebody will get to that point. Not impossible, of course. Of course, I believe that it's not impossible, because that is part of my role as a mental health professional and a holistic practitioner, to help people move beyond those labels and those judgments that they've been impacted by. But a person can do a whole lot of suffering on their journey to on their journey to where they finally are able to liberate themselves from those judgments and the stigma that have plagued them for years. We also need to stop putting Band-Aids on things and start really being problem solvers and look at how can each of us play a role in making things better. Making things better, starting with, well, what judgments, and we all do it. Just some of us do it more, right? So, but starting at the very least to say, okay, where am I judgmental? Where am I judging people? And trying to catch yourself in the moment so that you can turn that around and not do it. If you could see the damage that does to somebody, how bloody and beaten it leaves them energetically. It may not physically, if you don't strike somebody, it may not physically damage them, but emotionally, you could just really do a lot of damage emotionally to a person by inflicting judgment on them. And this needs to change. I believe it can change. And I believe that starting the conversation and continuing to have this conversation is what's going to make it change. And to watch what labels and judgment we put on people, and to realize, if you have a conversation with somebody, realizing we all are just human beings here trying to do the best that we can. I honestly believe that people do the best that they can at the time that they know how to do. But a lot of times people are not taught the skills that they need to have in order to make it through life in a functional way. So you see people live out their life making choices that you might not agree with the choices that they make, and you might not agree with how they live their life. You may not agree or see the color of their skin as being something positive, but rather make all kinds of judgment about who they are based on the color of their skin. It's time to wake up from that. We've had a really hard year, not only with the pandemic, but with all the uprising, with justified reason, truly. All the uprising and protests, and people are just really tired of it. And I think it's good, as long as violence is kept out of the picture. I think that it's good that people are protesting and uprising and just really tired with the way that things have been for centuries and centuries of time and history. But you don't necessarily have to be the one at a protest to make changes, and that's what I really want you to take away from this conversation today, is that you can make these changes that impact, it has that ripple effect, or that ripple effect of an impact on other people is how you view them. Because how you view a person, how you judge a person is going to determine how you treat that person. And that's going to make all the difference in the world. On a social standpoint, in terms of social stigma, you can pass on to somebody that you disapprove so much of them, you don't even have to say a word, but body language is very, very powerful. And people know, trust me, people know when you talk to them if you are having a positive vibe about it or you're not liking it or you're disgusted with them. People know that. They sense that. There may not be any words along those lines conveyed, but they know that. So changing how you judge or stigmatize people starts internally. What thoughts do you have about a particular population, like homeless people, like African American people or Hispanic people, and starting with, if you have judgmental attitudes and belief systems, starting to change that internally so that, one, you're not treating people like that. You're not looking at them or interacting with them in a way where you're disgusted with them. And instead, you're more likely, once you change that way of thinking, you're more likely to have a positive interaction with them, one where you might even be helpful to them. And the other thing is, a lot of times those judgments that you have, you will prove yourself wrong by interacting with people and not just sticking to what you originally judged them to be. I know I've experienced that before, where I'll walk away from a person and be like, wow, that person really had a lot to say, even though maybe they were really quiet. And so my judgment was, yeah, they don't really like to talk. But if I, am a little bit more assertive about it, boy, there's, people usually have a lot to say about what they feel and think about things. So be willing to put yourself out there if you come across somebody like that. Be willing to change your internal dialogue about people and situations and cultures that, maybe you were brought up believing about, right? Because that's really when it all starts. It all starts when somebody is a child. They're not born having those ideas and those judgments and stigmatizing people. That is conditioned into a person. And be willing to challenge that. Just because that's the way you were brought up does not mean that you have to stay stuck with that belief system. In fact, it's very empowering to change the way that you do believe about things, especially when you know that there are toxic belief systems that you maybe up to this point have held near and dear. Examine also, why do you believe that way? If you have a stigmatized attitude about mental illness, why? Where did you learn, whatever beliefs you have about a mentally ill person, where did you get going in that direction to believe those things about that person who's mentally ill? And, be really willing to challenge that, or somebody who's physically deformed or something. Where did you get that? And challenge yourself. Make yourself explain to yourself, because a lot of times you'll realize, wow, that's not even rational. I'm not even thinking rationally about that. So don't be afraid to have these conversations with other people. I certainly would love to talk to you more about it if you care to. You can reach me through remotely-unique.com. And let's continue this conversation. It's such an important one to have. This won't be the last time that you hear me talk about shame. Such an important topic. I'll at some point do a whole show, if not a series, on it, because shame is fatal. It can be fatal. So what else was I going to say? If you want to get a hold of me by phone, 505-315-7397. Remotely Unique. We also have a page on Facebook. And also my producer, Mike Suarez, he is moving through this evolution. He's the one, it was his idea for me to talk about stigma today. So I appreciate that. And it's because he knows it's such an important thing. What he said to me is, oh my gosh, it's like everywhere. And he was bothered enough by it to ask me to talk about it. So I think it's good. We should all take that as serious. All right, you have a wonderful day. Make it so. Make it amazing. And I will talk to you next time. Bye for now.